that we look at as kind of physical, like a dragonfly crawling out of the water as an underground bug up a cattail reed, and then eventually takes off and flies with more skill than the Sikorsky helicopter pilot, which is phenomenal when you think about it. I mean, how did it learn this stuff? So we look at that as well as genetics. There's something in the genetics that gives him that ability. Of course, he can catch a bug in midair by calculating angle of perception, incident angle, and airspeed, because dragonflies eat flies when they're flying. So besides all that stuff, this cockroach has the conscious genetic memory, so all of the files of his experiences through time are in his offspring, and he is, in a sense, a presence of all his species. So as you move through time and he travels in these stories, he's traveling aware of his past and his present and eventually his future. And so he's quite a character. And, there's a saying that success is turning negatives into positives. Well, if I can turn a cockroach into a positive, I'll feel I got a success here,
Absolutely. Yeah, many people, they look at insects or other animals and they don't realize, what's going on in their, on their species, in their head, so it's very interesting, to think inside another being,
Yeah. It's true. I always wonder what's going on in that mosquito's head as he's looking at the back of my neck.
Yeah, we always wonder what other beings and animals are doing, wonder what your pet dog is thinking, or the birds outside, or,
Yeah, it's true.
Absolutely. My next question is, do you have any plans on writing another book, or do you have any plans on making a sequel or another book after Tim, or anything else?
Well, I am working on, I have an outline now for another book that's really crazy. It's about Mickey Mouse holding the world hostage on the internet.
Oh, yeah.
And it's about this guy in Cupertino who is in Silicon Valley at the height of the techno age, and he's very successful, and everything's great. And then they had that big crash there, and he loses his business, which is fantastic. And, I mean, his business is fantastic, not that he lost it. And he's trying to figure what to do with his life. And he ends up hardwiring mice brains, live mice brains, that hold more memory than any computer has ever done. And the mice brains come together and end up using the network to communicate to each other, because they end up eventually controlling everything. And so that's the story I'm working on now. It's crazy, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's crazy, but it sounds very interesting to me. It does. Yeah. It's about our dependencies. We're dependent on things, and when they go out of whack a little bit, we go out of whack. We're seeing it now with the coronavirus. We're all getting a little out of whack here because it's something that we don't have the ability to really control what's going on. And when your technologies go out of whack, you can't control what's going on. So we're at an interesting stage in the human saga, we'll say. Yeah, when things go out of whack, the bad thing is all the hysteria. You don't know what to do, and everything just goes crazy.
That's true. And but I started with this stuff a I've always been a nature boy. I grew up 2 blocks from the La Brea tar pits in California, where all the fossil saber-toothed tigers and mastodons and dire wolves and all those things are. And when I was a kid, that park was not like it is today. Now it's got fences around each tar pit so people don't get trapped and all that. When I was a kid, there was nothing. You just went to it. It was like a lot full of tar pits that were full of bones of fossil, animals, and so I always kind of had a sense of paleontology and of time. I've always been fascinated by that. And in the early 70s, I designed a watch for Corum Watch Company, which is one of the fine Swiss companies in Le Château, Switzerland. And the watch was a fossil that I would dig everywhere, but this fossil I dug up in St. Clair, Pennsylvania, in an old abandoned strip mine where they'd strip the coal, off the top until you got to the bedrock, which was usually slate. And I went there, and this slate was full of the most beautiful fern leaves, little delicate fern leaves. And I took a bunch of them home and made a watch that I could wear, that I was looking at the beginning of time and the present time. I put the dial into an existing watch. I took it apart, put it back, drilled a hole, all that stuff. And it was seen by someone in New York who sent me to Switzerland, and they made the collection. And that was the beginning of looking at time a little differently. I was interviewed in the Chicago Tribune, and they asked me why I designed such a watch. And I said, well, if I have to make a meeting, I want to know what time it is, give or take a few million years. And that's really what it was. So this time thing, which is very much a part of the book, and the idea of fossils and I mean, cockroaches were being fossilized in stone before the dinosaurs ever came on the scene. You think about it. They've been around for 320 million years, and the dinosaurs were here like 100 million years ago. So they had about 200 million years to cook, to turn to stone. So time is pretty crazy, but it's fascinating to me.
Oh, absolutely. Time is very important, very valuable in the world, the beginning and the present and the future. You never know. Time is unpredictable, but it's very important and very valuable.
When you get to be my age, every second counts.
I understand that. Many people tell me that. I don't know it myself, but other people have told me.
I didn't realize it when I was younger, but I do now,
I'm starting to realize, so I guess that's a good thing. My last question to you is, and it's very important, it's a very interesting question for me because I ask it a lot on my show, because you are a writer, you've written a book, Tim, and now it's audiobook format. What is your advice to people who want to write a book? What is your advice to people who want to be a writer?
Well, I think that the first thing is to be inspired. And, I mean, Tim was an inspiration. It was my second book, and it was an inspiration all because I went through an experience of turning sedimentary layers of newspaper and discovering this bug, and it inspired me to say something, to write something. It expressed something to me that was meaningful, and I wanted to share that outwardly. So I think to be inspired about your subject, about what it is that you want to communicate, is important, because when you have that, you have unexhaustible energy. When you are up about something, you are up. And I think that is an important thing. Now, there are other things, obviously, like, you know how to spell, grammar, But for me, when writing Thames, there are a lot of mistakes in there. I mean, if somebody was to look at that book with that sort of a editorial eye, they'd be marking stuff up like crazy. But I decided not to let that get in the way. I'm going to let this thing flow, and if it makes sense, I'm leaving it alone. Because I'm not a writer who writes grammatically correct. I write more impressionistically or expression-wise, and I felt that that was good enough for me. But I think that writing is being inspired, and to be inspired, you need to journey. You need to have experiences. You need to find things that do get you there, you know. I mean, if you took a trip down the Amazon and it inspired you to write, it's going to be a lot better than looking up Amazon in the Encyclopedia Britannica and writing about it. Those experiences are what inspire us. And I would say, especially for young people, journey and go places that fascinate you, because they will be the things you write about.
Absolutely, and there's inspiration everywhere in your life or all around you. You just have to have the initiative to go look for the inspiration.
When I was a kid, I collected postage stamps. My dad had stamps. He was in World War II. Mm-hmm. He was a bombardier in the China-Burma theater. And he would go all through Africa and India, wherever he was, and collect stamps. And when he came home from the war, I was very young, so I didn't have much of a relationship. But a few years later, he shared them with me. And I fell in love with them. There were stamps with beautiful animals on them, stamps that had heads of state and presidents and kings and queens, and stamps that commemorated important events in history. And I got into this, and I started the stamp collection from his stamps. And I ended up doing a book about stamps because it inspired me, and I got into them. And the book was called Stamping Our History. It was by Lyle Stewart. It was like a coffee table book. Every image in the book was an image of a United States postage stamp in macro detail. So it might be a battle of Saratoga inside an American commemorative stamp that I blew up to the size of the book, which was 11 by 18 inches wide. And because the stamps were engraved like money, you could blow them up to the huge size, like 5,000, 10,000%, that little detail. And it held up. You could see it. So the book was inspired by that experience. And I think that's a good clue for people to do that. And that book got great write-ups. It was very successful. You can find copies on Amazon now and then. And but that was also something that was inspirational.
Absolutely. I'll have to check out that book, too. I love to read. I'm a slow reader, but I like to read. So,
Yeah, me too.
Well,
it took me longer to read Michener's Centennial than the period of time the book covered. I'm telling you, it was very slow.
Yeah, I have eye problems, so I have to look very carefully because sometimes, dyslexic or the words get jumbled, so I...
Yeah.
But I get it done eventually.
Yeah.
Well,
that's pretty cool.
Well, Chuck, thank you very much for letting me talk to you and interviewing you. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy you called, and I really appreciate you giving me this time.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Fred.
You have a good day. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And that was writer Mr. Chuck Davidson. Thank you very much for listening. As always, God bless.